Hungarian, I think, you know, Hungary's been around for over 1,000 years. That's quite old, isn't it? I would say quite a long. I mean, does that mean we're New Europe or Old Europe? In Rumsfeld's category, of course, we're New Europe. And I have to add that in Brussels, we're still the new member states. How long are we going to be the new member states? To use a very ancient language, quo usque tandem, abutira Catalina patientia nostra. How long yet will you extend our patience? This is from Cicero. I'm old enough to have done a lot of Latin, which I guess nobody else does anymore. I daren't use Latin in Parliament because the simultaneous translators would rebel. But you see, here I feel I can sort of slip you some Latin. Oh, yes, well, anyway. So, I don't really accept this categorization of Old Europe and New Europe. Netherlands, Old Europe?
That was the organisers.
Well, I mean who invented this title anyway? And that's even before I get into populism. Let me get on to populism. The first proposition I want to make to you is that there is no single, universal, internally consistent definition of populism that I've ever discovered. There's quite a tolerable literature on it, actually, and they all disagree about what is populism and what is not populism. Margaret Canavan's book is not bad on this. It's the one that I particularly remember. And sometimes, actually, it's a positive term. Populism is a good thing. Think about the United States at the end of the 19th century, William Jennings Bryan. He was a populist, and he believed that his role was to speak on behalf of the small man. Probably woman too, but at that time the vocabulary didn't work that way. Today, I think it's standard usage to express disapprobation of some phenomena that you think is a right-wing phenomenon. Now, that, it seems to me, is the beginnings of, I don't know about wisdom, but at any rate, some illumination. Because if you don't have an internally consistent definition, then the term can be used as a label, applied widely. Basically, it's impossible to disprove it, and you can append it, you can stick it on anything you don't like. If you see a phenomenon and you say, I don't like this, oh, it's populist, that's why. Then, of course, you've in a way short-circuited the possibility of argument. It's almost impossible to prove that you're not a populist. If somebody calls me a populist and I say to them, prove it, they say, everybody knows. Well, yes, in other words, you're guilty and you've got to prove your innocence. I have to add that Hungary at the moment is doing very badly in the popularity stakes. And certainly, one of my acquaintances in Budapest was saying that they were interviewed by a German journalist who said, well, you as a Hungarian are obviously an anti-Semite. What? How is this? Well, it's well known, everybody in Germany knows that all Hungarians are anti-Semitic. You mean all Hungarians, including Hungarian Jews? Don't trouble me with these things. I mean, it's totally absurd. We had a hearing yesterday in the European Parliament with the well-known Hungarian philosopher Agnes Heller, whom I've known since the 1970s. If you haven't read any of her books, do by all means. She's a superb philosopher. Unfortunately, when it comes to dealing with contemporary Hungarian politics, it's almost impossible to accept what she's saying. One of the things she did say yesterday, and there are several witnesses present to bear out what I'm saying, is she said, well, the explanation for why Fidesz, my party, got a 2/3 majority, which they did at the last elections, is Hungarians are servile. Now, put that in a slightly different context and say Hungarians are servile. I think it's unacceptable, but suppose we say Jews are servile or blacks are servile. It's a racist comment. This was a hearing held by the Greens, and they said, they didn't say anything. I had a chance to put a question to her, and I said, so Agnes, Hungarians are servile. Now, how come that you're an exception? But I'm afraid she didn't answer my question. Sometimes it happens that way. So what I'm saying is that you have these elastic terms which you can apply to given situations, which in a sense turn the argument, the political argument, in your favour. Let me add that if we accept this loose usage of the term populism, it's generally associated with the right. There is such a thing as left-wing populism. I can give you two instances just off the top of my head. The previous Slovak government under Robert Fico, when there was the Russian-Ukrainian natural gas dispute or war, Slovakia is 100% dependent on Russian gas, which all comes through Ukraine. And then if gas was turned off, which was in January, it was very cold. The Slovaks were freezing. So what does Fico say? If this goes on, we will reopen the Jaslovské Bohunice nuclear power station. Now, everybody knows that you can't reopen it overnight. It takes a month. Plus, you have to square the commission because it's actually mothballed and so on. The pure populist statement went down very well. Here's our Fico. Marsh Robert is saying, wonderful, I'm looking after you, etc., etc. He's a socialist. Does that make him right-wing or just populist? But then can you have left-wing populist? Well, take another example. There are to be elections in Estonia on the 6th of March. One of the parties, a very interesting political party, the Centre Party, Keskerakond, is led by a man called Savisaar, Edgar Savisaar. I have a hard time not to describe this party as a populist party, and Savisaar clearly the populist. He makes populist kinds of statements, of the kinds that are usually associated with the right wing, except that he's a left-wing person, and he describes the party as a centre-left party. In fact, they're part of the Liberal International. I don't really know what they're doing there. They really are a kind of socialist populist group. So I'm suggesting to you that actually the terminology is probably tainted anyway, but that doesn't stop people from using it. And then there's a further problem, and this is the old Europe and new Europe. It seems to me that most of the populists are discovered or identified as being to the east of here. Now this brings me to another slightly different topos. If any of you have worked on this area of how one understands Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, you may have come across Larry Wolff's book. It's called Constructing Eastern Europe or Constructing Central Europe. He argues that the stereotype of the East was already defined by Voltaire and the Illuminés in the 18th century, others, Rousseau. And basically the argument was that we are civilized, we are superior, but out there to the east are hairy barbarians. If you look at me, you will see I'm a hairy barbarian. I recently had a haircut, so I can't quite fit the stereotype. I haven't seen it, so this may be an urban legend, but I'm told that actually there was a cartoon in the Süddeutsche Zeitung which showed Hungarians as hairy barbarians. And I'm so glad that the stereotype actually becomes real. So, there is this element which post-colonial theory will reveal to you, if you've ever had a chance to look at it, that there are power issues as between West and East of Europe, and there's a tendency to create negative stereotypes to the East. Another bit of Latin, ex oriente lux, from the East comes light, but it's not true. From the East comes something else. Let me add that we do it too. To the east of Hungary, dubious things happen. And then to the east of Romania, even more dubious things happen. And I imagine for the Russians, China is another similar kind of east. So somehow you always shift it a little bit to the east. You export your problems eastward. We all do this. Let me offer you a tentative definition of populism. What I've written down is this. It's presenting a picture of a process, implying a promise that is qualitatively different from realities. I like the term in active disagreement with reality. I like the term in disagreement with reality. It's not mine. It comes from a Lithuanian writer called Tomas Venclova, in pursuit of a political advantage. So this means that, to me, that under this definition, the accusation of populism is ideologically driven.